A mistake is by definition an act or a judgment that's misguided or wrong. I made a mistake this summer, a pretty bad one, and it's not the first mistake I've made, not by far, and I know that there are many more mistakes yet to be made. But it is one of the worst so far. I lost my parents' trust in me, I lost a very dear friend, but I also lost a part of me that I realized that I was happy to get rid of. You see, a part of me has always been very naive and gullible. I thought that just because I would never do something to harm someone, then no one else would either. I came to realize this summer that the world does not work that way, no matter how much I would want it to. Or well, to be honest, I've always known that the world is not a fair place. People have told me. But it does not matter what you hear about the world. Reality will not quite hit you until you are the one caught up in a bad situation. But by then, it's too late. The day after making the mistake, I experienced a wave of guilt and shame that I'd never felt before. And I'll spare the details of my mistake. Just know that it was a bad one. I felt as if I'd ruined myself. And a part of me was convinced that I had. It took a lot of mental effort to drag myself through those first couple of days. I regretted making this mistake more than anything else. But somehow, the more I thought about it and the more I replayed the whole scenario in my head, the more I came to realize that I was happy I'd made this mistake. Because there's one thing that mistakes are made for, is to learn from them. So, mistakes, my dear audience, are good. Making a mistake is not equal to failure. Nelson Mandela once said, "I never lose. I either win or learn." Mistakes are the reason to why we're all here today. The reason to why humankind has gotten anywhere is thanks to mistakes. Imagine the first fire ever started by human hands. They must have been very curious about it, how it smells, how it looks, and how it feels. And whoever the poor soul was that chose to touch the fire made a mistake in doing so, because he realized that it would burn him. But he also learned from his mistake, spread his new knowledge, and prevented it from happening again. And this does not only apply to people in the past, it applies to us now. A concrete example of this are airplanes. They are still a relatively new invention. It's been a mere 100 years since the brothers Wright flew the first aircraft. So it's perfectly sensible that they can still improve. An example is the Turkish airline flight 981 that crashed outside of Paris in 1974. So during the flight, a cargo door blew off, which led to the cabin pressure dropping, and finally a section of the cabin floor collapsing. This ultimately led to an industry-wide change in design, limiting the possibility of depressurization. So although this was a tragic event, it ultimately led to a major improvement overall. And it's precisely because of this that I chose to not beat myself up over my mistake. I could turn the mistake into my advantage instead, by learning from it. The first thing I had to cope with was my guilt. And from a cognitive psychological point of view, guilt is something we feel when we are convinced that we've caused harm. According to Guy Winch, a well-known psychologist and author, we experience guilt for about 5 hours every week. I think I felt extreme guilt for at least 20 hours that week. But as soon as I came to my senses and realized that my guilt was not going to change anything, it was easier. You see, guilt will never change anything, but it's still good to some extent because it will prevent us from doing things that are against our morals and values. And it really is, because God knows where this world would be if none of us would feel remorse. Psychopathy is a great example of what happens when people are unable to feel remorse. Robert D. Hare, a Canadian psychologist, defines psychopaths as people who selfishly take what they want and do as they please, violating social norms and expectations without the slightest sense of guilt or regret. Psychopathy is recognized as a serious mental illness, so therefore, guilt and regret is natural. But beating yourself up over something that you cannot change does not make any sense. It's in the end not something that anyone will gain anything from. You cannot change the past. The only thing you can do is move on. After having dealt with my guilt, I went on to looking into the good things that came out of my mistake. As I mentioned previously, I lost a friend. It turned out that this friend was not a great friend after all. I had just not been able to see it until now. It didn't matter that we knew each other for a very long time. We still ended by splitting up. Relationships can have their limits, and that's okay. Sometimes a bad situation is required to help you open up your eyes about some of the things in your life that might not have been the healthiest ones. And this can include everything, such as unhealthy friendships, bad behavior, or perhaps drinking, which is a bad trait. Anyhow, this situation that I was in reminded me of something my parents always used to tell me in Bosnian. Niko tu život nije prijatelj, a ćeš kasno to shvat. It means that nobody in life is your friend, but you will realize it when it's too late. In essence, they were trying to say that I should be careful with whom I trust and that I should always be careful with what I share about myself. Trust can have many definitions, depending on from what view we're looking at it. But they are all really saying the same thing. Trust means to trust someone to do something and to trust that they will do it for the right reasons. It is said that trust takes years to build, seconds to break, and forever to repair. How do we forgive the betrayal that broke our trust? Or do we ever? The problem is that the craving of love and intimacy is often overshadowed by the fear of betrayal and pain. But no relationship will ever work if you do not trust the other person, which is why trust is a fundamental part of our lives. Using common sense, we know that in order to build trust, people slowly open up to get to know more and more about each other. Because when you trust someone, you will share your feelings, thoughts, and emotions because you trust them to not in any way harm you with it. But you should be careful with what you share about yourself and with whom, because you never know how it might be used against you. Your friend today might be your enemy tomorrow. But also remember that everyone that you trust today was once a stranger that you had to take a chance with. Perhaps today, they're one of the people you trust the most. So trust is crucial, but it should also be selective. You cannot go around thinking that everyone wants what's best for you, because they don't. I've learned, and I think that everyone should learn to think twice before revealing. Continuing, I learned that you should not care about what people say about you. It's like a friend told me in Bosnian. Nema veze jesi ti dobar ili loš, ljudi će opet u tebi tražiti najgore. It translates into, it does not matter if you're good or bad, people will still look for the worst in you. It got me thinking that it doesn't matter how bad I mess up or what I do. It doesn't matter how good I try to be. People will still look for the worst in me. And I believe that the reason why we do this has to do with our own insecurities. What's causing this is a defense mechanism called projection. Projection means that you're projecting what you're feeling onto someone else. And in this case, people who are not at complete satisfaction with themselves will be looking for the worst in others in order to make themselves feel better. Personally, I always wanted everyone to like me. I wanted to be on their good list. It didn't quite matter if I knew them or not. I still wanted them to think of me as a nice person. And there is a scientific reason to why we care about what others think. And according to Raj Raghunathan, an associate editor at the Journal of Consumer Psychology, it's to avoid shame and embarrassment, which is exactly what I was feeling back then. Those two emotions are very hard to cope with for anyone, which is exactly why people start caring about what others think, in order to protect themselves from those two feelings. But the less we care, the happier we are. Have you ever noticed how much better you feel when you do something that you want to do without putting any thought into the negative opinions that people might have about it? It gives us a feeling of freedom and fulfillment because we do something that pleases us without letting the negatives take away any of the happiness it brings us. As long as we have people that we care about by our side, we should not put so much thought into what unknown people think about us. Why should you let someone that means absolutely nothing to you take away any of your happiness? Another thing that many people do not seem to realize is that the mistakes you make do not make you a bad person. Your mistakes are not you. You see, when I defined what a mistake was, I said that a mistake is an act or judgment that's misguided or wrong. But personally, I feel as if there's an important part missing to this definition. I would define a mistake as an act or a judgment that's misguided or wrong, and that happens accidentally and or is regretted afterwards. Many of us will either judge another person based on their mistakes, or we will judge ourselves based on ours. And I do understand that because our actions reflect our morals and values. But I'm saying that it's not a valid thing to do Because you would not name it a mistake if you didn't do it accidentally, or if you didn't regret it afterwards, would you? And does that really, in that case, reflect your morals and values? Let's say I make a mistake today. I tell a lie about my closest friend that puts her in a bad situation. If I do not regret it afterwards, then it's safe to say that I'm a bad person. But if I do regret it afterwards, if I acknowledge that it was a mistake, then you cannot define my personality based on it. It's as simple as that. If Corrie ten Boom, a former prisoner in a concentration camp, decided to look past all of the awful mistakes that the guard had made, and that he deeply regretted, and she could bring herself to shake his very own hand, then we can look past all of the mistakes that we ourselves and other people make in order to see the real them and the real us. Those are the greatest things that I learned from my mistake, and for that I'm thankful. But after returning from my vacation, I noticed how I kept on making these other mistakes, ones which I usually make, and it made me wonder, how can I be so sure that I would not repeat the mistake I'd made this summer, but I could not stop myself from making these other mistakes over and over again? And according to Robbie Berman, a writer, it's not uncommon at all that people make the same mistakes over and over again. And this is due to the neural pathways that are created in our brains. When we do something right, a neural pathway is created. So the next time we're put in the same or a similar situation, we will know what the right thing to do is. Unfortunately, the same thing goes for when we do something wrong. People tend to fall back into their pathways when they're put in certain situations, which is why it's very common for us to repeat our mistakes multiple times. It's what leads us to this self-destructive behavior of making the same mistake over and over again and suffering each and every time. But after a while, you must certainly realize that you are continuously making the same mistake over and over again. There must ring some bells. There must be something in you saying, I've walked down this road before and I know exactly where it will lead me. And when it comes to that, it's really only up to you to spare yourself from that pain. And it's also your responsibility to stop making them if they're harming others. It's up to you and only you to choose if you will make your mistakes to your advantage or if you will beat yourself up for it. Learn. Learn from your mistakes and do your best not to repeat them. At some point in life, you're going to have to settle down with the fact that you're not perfect and will never be, because perfection does not exist. Everyone will mess up, and I'm the first one to admit that I will. I'll mess up real bad sometimes. But you have to find your way through this mess that you make. And the sooner you settle down with this, the better. Because in the end, the key to becoming a better person is not by avoiding your mistakes. It's by learning from them. Thank you.